I like to think of it as the thing that makes you effortlessly brilliant at what you do. And it's often those things that we overlook. But when you're aware of that, and like your map and the landmarks that are important to you, it becomes so much easier to get that context that you need, so that you can reach your goals and be productive.
Hello, and welcome to episode 109 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review. That would mean a lot to me. Tell a friend about the podcast. Help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Dr. Mariella Franker supports introverted solopreneurs in getting clarity about which actions to take so that they can be the best version of themselves without being held back by low energy. After years of playing the part in her work and trying to make the most of her time by fitting extra things into all the nooks and crannies of the day, she felt burned out, lost, and disconnected. She knew she could add more value to the world, but didn't know how. Then she learned more about herself and what it really means to be an introvert. She started to work more with her natural strengths and create habits that support her personal needs. Now she's a certified natural advantage productivity coach. She's co-founder of the Science and Medical Writers Network in Benelux, associates coach at The Successful Introvert, and CEO of the Franker Message. She's the host of the Productive Introvert Community podcast and has been featured in places like European Medical Writers Association, Making Money Online podcast, and Marie TV. She lives in the Netherlands with her husband and son. On most days, you'll find her working in her little cabin office, hanging out with her family, or putting around in her home or garden. All right. I am excited for my guest today, Mariella. Mariella, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, David. It's a pleasure.
And we recently were on a panel together through Introvert U talking about introverts and productivity. And that is a big passion of ours because we want to be productive. We want to get the things done that we want to do. But the approach is definitely different for an introvert, right?
In my experience, definitely 100%. Yeah.
So we will get into that and all the great work you do around that. But before we do, tell us about how you discovered you were introvert and how you learned to embrace that.
Yeah, so this is always an interesting question because sometimes it's difficult to tell like the difference between what feels really natural to you and things that you've learned that maybe you're good at, but they don't necessarily come really natural to you. So in my case, I probably always knew that I was an introvert. I just didn't know the term for it. I didn't know what it really meant. So I grew up in South America, in a country called Suriname. And Surinamese culture is a very warm culture. Large gatherings, are very common, and people love to sit together and like tell stories. And I was typically the kid at those large gatherings that would sit next to my mom and color or listen to the adults talk instead of going off to play with the other kids. So in that sense, I always knew that I wasn't that type of person that liked to really mingle a lot. I knew that I liked to listen to people. I knew that I preferred like more solitary activities like coloring, drawing, painting. And I knew that I had that rich inner life, right? Always off in some fantasy world in my head. But I think the thing that was most confusing to me growing up is that I really liked people. I really liked to be with people, but I didn't really know how to connect with them because I would usually just observe and not really, engage in conversation. And that did make me feel on some level like something was wrong with me. And it wasn't until much, much later that I learned about the term introvert and what it actually meant. And because I bought into all the misconceptions, I didn't really know what it meant when I was younger.
How'd you learn the term?
So I learned a term, I read the book from Mary Olson called The Introvert Advantage.
Yes, that's a great book.
Yeah. great book. So much recognition, like from the first page, I think the introduction, immediate recognition. And that's when it started to grow from me, like, oh, there isn't something wrong with me. Other people also have this mix of wanting to be with people and wanting to be by themselves. So it was that was really kind of opened my world.
Yeah, and we will definitely get into some myths, but that is definitely one that we don't like people. It's kind of crazy. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they were saying the same thing, that was a big myth for them, and they like to talk to everybody. And I pressed her just a little bit, and I'm like, okay, but do you like small talk? No, I hate small talk. I go deep right away. And I'm like, yeah, that's us. Yeah, we love to have deep conversations. I'm totally enjoying this conversation. We don't like small talk that lasts forever and lots of other things. But anyway,
dive right in.
Yeah. So you figured all that out. Now you're helping other introverts, especially with productivity. What are some strengths that you have yourself as an introvert, or that you've seen in others that you're coaching?
Yeah. So in terms of strengths, so like when we talk about generally for introverts, one of our biggest strengths is observing and reflecting, right? And kind of coming up with, our creativity lives within that reflection process. But what we also learned, what I'm learning through my coaching and what I help people with, is that underneath those sort of general characteristics that we have as introverts, everyone has their unique problem-solving ability, basically. And what that means is you can envision it like having a map. And we all have our map of how we navigate the world, but everyone's map is a little bit different depending on what you pay attention to. And when you follow your map, things are easy. They're easy to find, and you can get into that state of flow. So in my coaching programs, we discover each person's unique map, so to speak. And I can give you a couple of examples of what that looks like for people. So for an example that comes to mind of one of my clients is, we discovered that she's very good at connecting with what people need to get, what people need in order to get them what they want. And when she makes this connection, a plan like effortlessly appears in her mind. She needs basically nothing more. And she can adapt to situations and take action when like windows of opportunity presented themselves to help these people. But this was something that she thought everybody did, but it was really something very unique to her. And I can give you another example to contrast that, if that helps.
Yeah.
So, okay. So someone else that I coached, she was very good at organizing things in an efficient way, so that she could achieve whatever goal she was working on. So she would analyze in advance, like, who is involved, what does everyone want, and from there she would go on to, okay, what do I need to do? What are resources that are available to reach this goal? And along the way, she'd check in a very natural way, go back to the people and check in with them. So she got everyone aligned, and if she needed to adjust anything. And once she had that, the plan formed and she could just execute. So it's a very different way of solving, potentially, even if they would work on the same problem, they would both come with a very good solution, but achieved in a very different way.
Right. And these are both introverts, correct?
These are both introverts, yeah.
Yeah. And that's so important. It's because we're not all the same. We have different gifts. We have some things in common. Like you said, we're good observers, but with that observation, it's not just observation, it's the reflection behind it. And I think that's probably common to most introverts, but not everything is. We do definitely still have our different gifts. So yes, those are great examples. And like you said in the first one, sometimes we're so close to our own gifts that we don't realize, oh, everybody isn't like this. This is something that I need to share because it's my gift that people need, and everybody can't do this kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I like to think of it as the thing that makes you effortlessly brilliant at what you do And it's often those things that we overlook. But when you're aware of that, and like your map and the landmarks that are important to you, it becomes so much easier to get that context that you need, so that you can reach your goals and be productive in your work without feeling like it's very draining or very hard.
Yeah, if we're using our gifts, it can be effortless, like you're saying. And the other thing is we need to realize, yeah, I have some gifts here, but we also need to realize other people do too. And so we can help them with the same, that, yeah, that's your gift that you need to use. And that's, that's definitely what you do in your coaching, right?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a really interesting thought, because I think I was always looking for a way to use my natural gifts in my work. So it's difficult to explain in hindsight, because it's about me, right? Because when you're so close to it, it's more difficult to see. But yeah, but as far as I understand it now, is that for me to go through my process, I need to have certain things in place. And my natural gift is also very much geared towards the other person. So there are two kind of pitfalls with people who have that type of natural gift. Is the first thing is, if we don't have all the context that we need, we get stuck. Like especially when you're trying to find out, what does this person need? There are layers on top of that, communication. It's understanding that person's context, how to get that information. And the other part is that oftentimes we forget ourselves. So, and we tend to over focus on the other, the context of the other person, and we don't take into account our own energy management or something like, and things like that.
So you busted one myth already, that, yes, we like people, Is there another introvert myth that you've heard that you want to dispel today?
Yeah. So I think the myth that really needs dispelling, in my opinion, is that introverts are low energy people.
Okay.
So yeah, it's you know
that's
that
this week's podcast, right? I just listened to that.
That's true.
I just listened to that.
You're right. Yeah. Actually, I talk about that a lot
all the
on
time.
my podcast. Yeah, all the time, because it's a huge theme. It's a huge theme for introverts, especially the introverts that I work with. And as you and your listeners probably know, most introverts, we tend to get drained energetically when we interact all the time, especially interacting with loads of people. So it can be hard for people to interact, even though they may want to make those connections. And I really used to think of myself as low energy. I used to use it as an excuse, as a disclaimer all the time, to not do things or to not go to events. Typically, but what I now know is that introverts, we typically experience low energy because of two reasons. Either we don't recharge enough, or not in a way that suits that individual person, or we're not doing enough of the things that feel fulfilling.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good way to look at it. I think the question is, you just got to ask yourself, what is it that is fulfilling? What do I want? And it's not, like you're saying, it's not, you don't use introversion as an excuse, but you use it more as a framework. Like, how do I get what I want? How do I use my gifts and make sure I'm taking care of my needs? How do I do that to get what I want? But it's not an excuse. It's just, I'm going to go about this a little bit differently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Introversion is not something that needs to be overcome.
Yeah, you can't, right? You can't, even if you want to.
Sometimes you try. I mean, I tried for a long time.
Yeah, me too. I'll say that you can't. It's not effective. So you're a fellow podcaster. Tell us about the Productive Introvert Community podcast and why you decided to start that, and how is productivity different for introverts versus extroverts?
Yeah. So first of all, why I decided to start it. Podcasts have always been one of my favorite ways to learn new things and to find mentors. So most of my mentors, I've never actually met them. I've heard them on an interview or on a podcast. So when I started my coaching business, I always knew that was something that I was interested to do. And especially if you have an online business like me, and some of my clients do as well, one of the biggest challenges is to find formats and channels that work for you, right? Something that you're both excited and happy to do, and that also allows you to reach your people and to make those genuine connections. So tried a lot of different things in the past years, and podcasting, it really ticks, is the one thing that ticks all those boxes for me. And your second question was about how productivity is different, right, for introverts
Yes.
and extroverts. So I think the main things that make productivity different for introverts revolve around energy management on one hand, and that natural process that we talked about before on the other hand, the natural way that you solve problems. So being productive, it's not about delivering work constantly, right? I think you mentioned this as well on one of your previous episodes. Like productive does not equal busy, and busy does not equal productive.
Right.
And the thing that a lot of people overlook, and especially for introverts around energy management, is that it's about finding that harmony between resting and producing, so that you can actually continue to be creative and deliver optimally over time, not just one burst and then you crash, basically. And I like to compare this to physical exercise, actually, because that's easy to visualize. Like we never expect someone who's just run a sprint to just keep on sprinting. Just keep going nonstop. No, you will always rest after having exerted yourself physically, and then replenish, So if you want to perform at a high level in anything, you need to be really vigilant about resting and replenishing accordingly, and finding that harmony between rest and producing. So the natural process of extroverts is a little bit different, and we can go into details about that if you want. But the main reason why energy is less of an issue for extroverts is because they typically replenish through that interaction with other people. So they already get that energy when they are active and talking and being around a lot of people. So in our day-to-day, especially in Western society, well, it was a bit different during the pandemic, but under normal circumstances, and getting back to that way again now, we interact a lot. Actually, I take that back. During the pandemic, there was less direct contact, but we were much more online. And let's be honest, the online world can be even more noisy, and it never sleeps. So that issue of getting overstimulated and not managing your energy well can become a real problem for introverts. And for extroverts, it's generally speaking, of course, there are always exceptions, but generally speaking, that's less of an issue.
I always say generally speaking too, because, we don't ever want to say everybody is exactly the same. So that's great. How is preparation an important part of productivity for introverts?
Yeah. So, like we mentioned before, the natural way that most introverts work is, well, let me give you an example. Let's say you come into a new situation. Most introverts typically will observe first, then reflect, and then share their thoughts. And this is very different from extroverts. They will typically voice their thoughts immediately, and the thinking process happens kind of in parallel. So an introvert, I like to say it this way: an introvert typically forms their thoughts through internal reflection, while an extrovert forms their thoughts while speaking with another person. And yeah, we've talked about this before when we were on the panel as well.
Yeah.
But Yeah, but both processes are valuable. But it's really important to understand the differences because it can prevent a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of miscommunications. Um, in a nutshell, this is the natural way that most introverts work, but it really gives you clues as to the communication styles around it and the natural decision-making process. And when we talk about productivity, that is really kind of like the tipping point where a lot of introverts feel like they're not productive, that they are always procrastinating, always overthinking. And it's because they don't understand their natural process. And when that natural moment for them comes to make a decision and to take the next step.
Yeah, procrastinating is an interesting thing because it's like you're describing, we're not always going to make decisions on the spot. Sometimes we are. Sometimes we're not going to need time to think about things. And, again, it's not that we always need a lot of time, but sometimes we need time to think about things. And, I look back and reflect. Of course, that's what we're good at. I reflect on some decisions that I've made, some big decisions, and they came with time. And I think about, if I had made a snap decision on that, it probably wouldn't have turned out as well. So it's important for us to give some things some thought. Often just letting those thoughts roll around in our heads, different things come together for some really good, innovative, creative ideas. But sometimes we have to allow ourselves to do that. And we can get pressured to not take any time to think. And we have to understand how that works.
Yeah, exactly.
How do we
It's not
avoid,
really.
I was going to say, how do we avoid overthinking? Because that could be a problem.
Yeah.
That with giving ourselves time to think, it can turn into overthinking and procrastination
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that nicely fits in with this topic we're talking about now. So overthinking, like you mentioned, it usually shows up when we either don't have enough time to reflect on our thoughts, or we don't have enough context. And that context that goes back to that map analogy that we used before, right? That your natural process of solving problems that's unique to you. So when we work a problem, we go through a couple of stages. And the most important stage is what I call the connecting the dots stage. To get to that stage, introverts need context and they need reflection. So to avoid it or to work through it, because I don't really think avoiding it is the way to go about it. This is a process that you will go through anyway, whether you want to or not. If you're an introvert, you will reflect on things. So making space for that and working with it rather than against it. So one of the practical tips that I can give is to pay attention to the questions that naturally pop up for you. The questions that come into your mind are usually like the missing pieces of context. So try to answer those questions, and that will give you the context that you need to start connecting those dots. And the other reason that you mentioned is not having time to reflect. So when you're constantly busy, jumping from one thing to the next, or just not taking any quiet time, that can actually cause overstimulation, and you don't have that natural reflection process that you go through anyway. So in practical sense, having some kind of a reflection practice, that makes a huge difference. And what that looks like is different for everyone. But all the examples of successful people and happy introverts out there, especially, they have some kind of reflection process throughout their day or throughout their week. So examples include things like journaling, walks in nature, even relaxing under the shower, or prayer and meditation can work really well.
So for you or for people you've coached, is that something that you schedule, or something like taking a walk or being in the shower or whatever? Is that something that just occurs naturally throughout the week, or both?
That's a good question. That is actually also different for each person.
Okay.
So yeah, depending on your natural process, some people really like to have it scheduled. So I've coached people who really like that regularity. It kind of anchors them throughout their day and throughout their week. But I've also have coaching clients who actually the mere thought of scheduling that kind of makes them break out into hives, right? So that's obviously a big sign that that's not for you. So your process is then different. So really listen to yourself with that and experiment a little bit. There's always a little bit of trying out, and you will very clearly notice what works best for you. As soon as you notice it's blocking you or it's actually making you feel anxious, then just let it go. And it's okay to try another way.
Yeah. And again, just going back to introverts are not all the same. There's definitely some people that are more scheduled, like to have things planned out. And there's definitely people that want to be more spontaneous. And like you said, the thought of scheduling things like that doesn't work for them. And that's what it's about. You have to get to know yourself and what truly works for you. And one gift that we have on our side is reflection, that we can try something and see how it works and think about, was that effective for me? And that's a cool thing.
Mm.
How is it important to set priorities in order to be productive?
Yeah, that's well, I mean, priorities, that is essential, right? Like we mentioned before, productivity does not equal being busy. So busy is when we try to do everything, preferably at the same time. That's when we start feeling really busy and frantic. Productivity is all about doing the few things that will have the most impact on your overall goal. So inherently, if you want to be productive, you need to set priorities. And especially nowadays when we have so many things going on, both private life, work life, everything around it, it can be quite difficult to decide on priorities. But I like to think of it like we can do anything, but we can't do everything. And in my opinion, and I'm curious to hear your take on this, David.
Okay.
But in my opinion, there are three main reasons why people get stuck and they don't feel productive. So it's about clarity, priorities, and managing distractions. Clarity is about what you want to do. Priorities is about choosing what to do next. And managing distractions is about staying the course once you've made the choice, just to put it bluntly. So yeah, if you have these three things, then it becomes much easier to reach any goal that you want to achieve. But if you're struggling in one of those areas, it can really slow you down.
Yeah, I love that you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And I definitely have found that. And that's kind of how I got into looking at how I could be productive, because I was trying to do everything and it doesn't work because there's not enough time in the day to do everything. And you have to get really clear, like you're saying, you have to get really clear on what do I want to accomplish? What's the most important things with my family, with my business, with my life? What's the most important things? And, usually people think of the new year as a good time to reflect. It is a good time. But you have to do it so much more frequently than the year, You have to set aside some time to reflect and think about, okay, how am I doing? Am I getting the things done that I want to do? And however often that is, that's going to vary by individual, like you're saying. Maybe it's once a month, maybe it's every quarter. It definitely has to be more than once a year.
Yeah.
That's not frequent enough. But you have to think about, okay, am I getting what I want? Am I doing those things for the other people, important people in my life that I want? And if not, what do I need to change? What do I need to do? What is your definition of productivity? Because we're agreeing it's not being busy.
Yeah. I think I just said a version of that, but for me, productivity is when you do those few things that have the most impact on what you want to achieve. And I really recognize what you said about trying to do everything. Because that was my approach to productivity also for a long time, fitting in extra things, extra work into all the nooks and crannies of the day, thinking that would get me closer to that goal that I had. But it did the opposite, because I was always tired, not sharp, making mistakes, not having time for reflection, and actually feeling quite anxious as well. Because one thing we didn't talk about is that a lot of introverts have a very strong inner critic, because we're so reflective, right? We spend a lot of time thinking about things that we said, things that someone else said, things that happened, things that we should have said. There's a lot going on inside of our heads. And a lot of us have also gotten messages, sometimes well-meaning messages, growing up, that being quiet or being not participating as much as other kids, that somehow wasn't okay. So a lot of people that I work with, a lot of introverts, have internalized these messages, and that fuels their inner critic. So they walk around with a lot of doubts, and a lot of anxiety, actually, about the choices that they're making. So embracing that your natural process includes reflection. And like you said, really thinking about what are the most important things. And I love that you mentioned those different areas, because it's not just about work. It's also about personal life. It's about the type of person that you want to be. It's about how you want to live your life. All of those things, having clarity about what that looks like or feels like to you, can really be like that northern star that guides you to make your choices.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you don't find that clarity, that definitely can lead to, being burned out, trying to do too much. So I think that's one way. Is there any other things that people can do if they do reach that burnout point?
Yeah. So I've been burnt out. That was one of the pinnacle, like the shifts for me that really changed the way that I viewed productivity. And I've also worked with some people who were either recovering or leading up to burnout. So basically the first thing that I would say, if that's you, honestly, at that stage, I wouldn't even worry about productivity, because burnout is a very serious mental and physical depletion, and you just need to recover. So the most important thing there, I think, is sleep and nutrition, really going to basics and physical health. Because if you don't have that, you will not be able to have the mental clarity to start building again. And once you have that stabilized, like if you're sleeping well and you have your nutrition giving you the physical energy that you need, that's when you can start building again towards, whatever goals that you want to have. Now, of course, this is much more difficult to achieve than we're just saying right now. And ultimately, I feel that the way to get through that is to have a support system, and especially a human support system. That's how I like to call it. So there are a lot of thoughts going through my head, because I'm thinking about a lot of different people right now in my life, but also my clients. And it can be very hard to ask for help. And I see that in my clients too, the people that I work with. It's also something that I'm still learning, to ask for help when, you actually already know that it is too much. And I like to think that the relationship that I have with my clients, that I'm one of the people that are in their human support system.
What's the kind of number one thing that your clients are coming to you for help for?
So the main issue that my clients come to me with is around energy management. But there are usually different reasons underneath that why they are experiencing low energy. So it's almost like a symptom. It's not really a symptom because, we're not talking about disease patterns here, but that's how it shows up in their daily life, like feeling really run down, just throughout the day, having a lot of trouble keeping their energy up to do their work, or they feel their relationships are draining to them, or their work is draining. In the process of figuring out their map, we uncover the reason underneath. And a lot of the time it has to do with either, actually, those two things that we talked about earlier, that they're either not recharging enough or in a way that feels good to them. One common mistake that a lot of introverts make is they try to sleep away their exhaustion. But sleeping more doesn't actually recharge if you don't have time for self-reflection. So that is something that I see a lot. And the other part is that they're not doing enough things. They're not doing enough things that really fulfill them. So they're doing work where they're not able to work in their natural process using their unique map. And they're always trying to work according to their map to find their landmarks, and they're not able to find it. It's just a completely different map in their work environment, for example, and they get lost. And that is very draining because it has a lot of energy to work in that way. So those are usually the generally speaking, the things that are underneath that energy management problem.
So there may be somebody that's out there that was a little disappointed by the sleep advice because, that it's not going to fix things. But I mean, really, it's important to get the right amount of sleep, just not too much, right?
Yes, exactly. So yeah, of course, sleep is essential. We also talked about it in terms of burnout, but it's not the solve all in this case, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I think occasionally that's probably a good thing, but just that shouldn't be your regular go-to. And like you're saying, find those things if you haven't already that really light you up, that really, that you get excited about.
Yeah, 100%. And just try to get more of those into your life. I see my clients do that in small and sometimes big ways, but small ways can make a lot of difference as well.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be a gradual process as you're changing your life and trying to find more of those things that really get you excited. It can take some time, but be headed in that direction. Mariella, we talked about so many great things today. Are there any other big productivity tips for introverts that we haven't touched on?
Well, I like to talk about practices rather than tips.
Okay.
Because when I think about a practice, it's something that you revisit constantly. Okay. And that really plays into the reflective nature of introverts. So anything that you want to do, be it healthy habits or getting a reflection, to having more reflection, try to think of it in terms of a practice and not just a one-off thing that you do and that is rigid, but it is something that is something you revisit and that you can adapt to your needs.
How often do you reflect on your practices? And I know that can be different for everybody, but in general, is there some advice there?
That's a good one. And so this also is different for everyone. Like we mentioned, some people, they really like regularity. So for them, it can take a long time to figure out what works. But once they find it, it's golden. And sticking to it just gives them so much peace of mind, and they get into flow really easily. Other people, and I'm the second type, we constantly change our practices, basically. And for me, it's really like a fluid process. I will have, and it will also change seasonally, almost, not necessarily with the seasons of the weather, but more the stage of business that I'm in, the stage of the project that I'm in. And for me, it's almost a daily process.
Yeah, definitely. This episode has been so full of good ideas for practice. Where can people find out more about the great work that you're doing for introverts and productivity in your podcast?
Yeah. So one of the places is my podcast, Productive Introvert Community with Mariella Franker. So if you just search for that, on your favorite podcast app or where you're listening right now. You will probably find it there. And that's where I share a lot about these types of misconceptions and practices that are helpful for introverts. Or if you're a hands-on kind of person and you want to get started right now, then you can also go to my website, thefrankermessage.com/subscribe. And I have a free training bundle there waiting for you that you can access for free at any right now. And that one is about that reflection process that we talked about. It kind of walks you through a mini version of that works well for me and for some of my clients. Mind you, not all. Like I said, this is different for everyone. But if you are looking to start a reflection process and you practice and you don't have that yet, that can help you get started. So if you want to start with that, go to thefrankermessage.com/subscribe.
Okay, very good. I will put that in the show notes as well.
Thank you, David. It was fun talking to you. Really great questions and insightful conversation. I loved it.
Yes, me too. Thank you, Mariella. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts, links to social media, and other items. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there's now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the 4-letter Myers-Briggs code. I'll add a link to the show notes. There's so many great things about being an introvert, so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.